Welcome to the Software Without Borders podcast. I'm your co-host, Jarret Streiner. Along with me is my co-host, CEO of Accelerance, Andy Hilliard. Today is our guest, Rich Wanden. He's the Chief Customer Success Officer at Accelerance. Rich has worked in management consulting, IT advisory, and outsourcing for over 25 years with companies like Ernst & Young, Deloitte, Logica, Computer Sciences Corp, and Tech Mahindra. Originally from Wellington, New Zealand, Rich has lived in Japan and Australia, and now the US. He's worked globally in places like India, Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, and he has a passport full of stamps from all of his other travels. Welcome to the podcast, Rich.
Thank you very much, Jarret. Nice to be here.
So today we're going to be talking about staff augmentation, which is, one of those nice little buzzwords everybody hears about. So why don't you kind of just tell us what staff augmentation is and why would a company actually use staff augmentation?
So staff augmentation is really a strategy that companies will employ to bring on resources as and when they need them, to fill gaps on a temporary basis mostly. They're not full-time employees, but they fill the gaps where they may not be able to hire a full-time employee or have that expertise. So it's a very useful strategy to employ, but like any strategy, there are things to look out for, and there are challenges with it. And I guess the most important thing is to think, what are your expectations? Why are you doing it? And what are the outcomes you're looking for? And that way, if you align, you won't be disappointed. If you misalign, well, that's where disappointment comes in.
Well, speaking of that, can you tell us a story or something from your history where a company had brought on and started working with some staff augmentation, and what kind of impact did it have on their organization?
Well, when I look back when I was working with CSC, we had a very large resourcing company that was a subsidiary, and that was sold off as a non-core asset, but it was the largest recruiting company in Australasia. We would use that company to help our clients when they just wanted people. So they didn't want consulting, they didn't want a project run, they just needed people on project teams to do work. And that works really, really well for many clients. And the tension that you would have inside the firm was your consulting teams would be saying, well, why can't we be consulting to the client? Well, get off. The client doesn't want that. Right? Give them what they want, give them what they need. If they have the wherewithal to manage those teams and direct them, that's what they want to do. So let them do it. And and that really gets to the core of the issue around staff augmentation. Someone has to manage the people. And being able to do that's important.
Rich, so this is frankly my most important question today, because you and I work together, and even I think sometimes in various discussions, you and I may have a difference of understanding regarding the definition of staff augmentation in a particular situation. And I bet you anything that our listeners all probably have slightly different understandings of what that is. For example, you just used managed contractors, and in our world, as contractors that reside offshore. But you also have, I guess, recruiting firms, which will help you augment your staff by putting bums in seats. And you probably have service providers who are asked to just do the recruiting function, not the management function. The fact is that all of these are staff augmentations, and people are probably walking around with a different understanding. So are there different terms? How do you normalize the definition of staff augmentation, at least for the purpose of this webinar?
Well, we're perfectly aligned on that, because it's the interesting thing. I think often, like I said, you've got the company got to manage the people. If they're good for doing that, that can create great outcomes. Likewise, where those resources are coming from has an impact on the outcome. Now, if you look at a spectrum, you can think of the body shops, which are truly like they'll throw resumes at you as a client and say, hey, you want 5 Java engineers? Here we go. Here are some resumes. Pick which ones you like. We're off, right?
That's augmenting staff, right?
Right. Exactly. Full end of the spectrum is you might go out to a services firm and say, hey, I know you do projects, but could you help us with staff augmentation? So the term augmentation, that's what's happening on the client side, but where those resources are coming from, I think can have a very different impact on the outcome for the customer. So I'll give you some examples of that. Um, I'm a great proponent of, if you need to do staff org, do it with a services company that is well set up for staff org. And another caveat, we see this all the time with our network of partners that we deal with. Some of them aren't staff augmentation firms. They're good for doing projects, and their staff like working on projects as a project team with a customer team, right? So there's definitely a model that works well when the quality resources are engaged. If you take professional services, software engineers from a software company and put them into a staff augmentation model and isolate them, as it were, from all of the things that they've joined those companies for, that doesn't necessarily result in great outcomes. And we've seen a lot of attrition with customers coming to us and saying, hey, people aren't enjoying the work, that they seem to be turning over. They seem to be asking, the worst thing is they want to go to a new project. They don't like what I'm doing. Well, why? Could be how you're treating them. So that really comes down to how you manage the people. But I guess, like you're saying, it's the definition. The strategy is augmentation, but how it is happening does have a great impact on how it works out for the customer in delivering software.
And I guess not necessarily any one of these definitions, depending on the scenario, is not necessarily bad or good. It depends on the client and their specific needs and their desire for maybe control.
Well, you're right, Andy. It's not necessarily bad or good, but the thing is that when you step back and you look at what you're about to do, you can kind of predict whether or not it's going to work out well, or you're going to identify what you might need to do to actually make sure that it works out well, i.e. de-risk the situation. And we can talk about that a little bit more, about how to de-risk staff org depending on where you're taking the resources from. Okay, and I think there are three scenarios. The first one is just do it yourself. Go knock yourself out, go to the job boards of the world and try and find people. Do it yourself. The second one is okay, let's go to a company like a Robert Half and say, Robert, get me the people, and Robert's people will go out and find you resumes and flick them to you. And they wish you well. And then the other one is go to a services company that will say, sure, we'll give you people, you manage them, but they're good people. And by the way, we're watching what they're doing, and we know what they're doing is good or bad. And if you need any help, if you get into trouble with this team you're assembling, knock on the door, because we're here to help. So you got 1, 2, 3. So where do we start? Where do you want to start with?
So that really helps this conversation, because I'm thinking that there's different personas that want to do everything themselves, and some personas that say, well, I want talent from a reputable, credible recruiting company who's also going to ensure that my staff that I'm bringing on board is becoming more efficient over time, or being measured, or and is someone I can go to for help, right?
Absolutely. So if you look at the do-it-yourselfers, and we've seen an emergence of that in the last few years. It sort of started out with the Great Resignation, with everyone working remotely, and then everyone looking for new jobs as part of that because they could get more money. So off they all went. I think a lot of companies have run into a few problems. They've met some really, really professional candidates, good at talking up what they can do, and they've hired them. And then they've discovered that they weren't exactly what they thought they were buying, and it's all on them as a customer. Now, look, the impact of that on a project, as we know, when an engineer's either been making poor decisions for you, or hasn't been telling you what they don't know, hasn't been dealing with the hard things, has been avoiding them, and that has consequences. And we've seen that with customers where they've come with consequences around the architecture and the scalability of a product. We have one right now who's come to us and said, hey, our documents were clear. Our requirements were a multi-tenancy software as a service platform, and we have nothing like it. And in the interim, that customer is having to onboard new customers in single instances at great cost, and they're figuring out a way to go and re-platform their software or re-architect their software so that it will be multi-tenancy. Right now, that's really a disaster and near-death experience for a customer, and a lot of that happened through really a staff augmentation play. So you need to be really careful. You meet some great candidates, and the second part of that is like I said, a lot of them won't tell you what they don't know for fear of losing their job, having to find a new one, and that's a real problem with a bunch of contractors. And it's not just one. You might have 20, you might have 50 under that scenario working inside your company as an uncoordinated team that you have to bring together. Okay. So that would be my caution there. The other big thing I know that's really cropped up is people are surprised that in this remote world that it may appear sometime down the track that those people that you've hired are actually working two jobs, one for you and one for someone else. And everyone who discovers that finds it incredible, but yet we see that happening. And again, if you're working with a partner that can guarantee you someone does 8 hours work a day for you as a minimum, and that they're monitoring that, and they've got the smarts to actually know what their staff are doing even when they are working remotely, that's a great thing. And I'd be very careful about that with staff org.
Yeah, that's so contracting anyone is a relatively expensive endeavor, and I'm sure a lot of people that are looking to do staff augmentation, they might kind of focus on the hard costs, like using a platform is cheaper than using a recruiter, which might be slightly cheaper than using a services organization, because each one has more overhead than the other. But I think you had mentioned before about the consequences of going cheap versus adding a couple of layers of professionalism up the value chain and staff auging, but also getting the best results. Because I think people underplay the consequences. The consequences are extremely grave, but they can't really put it in dollar signs. They can say, well, this costs this and that costs that. That's the delta. But there's a lot to be said for the consequences, right?
I think when you look at a lot of pre-revenue startups, I don't see very many of them operating under a pure staff org model. I think a lot of those seasoned entrepreneurs have an approach of saying, let's go out and get a team formed as a team and delivered to me to deliver a project. They might supplement certain roles, but generally they'll probably say to the service provider they're working with, hey, you supplement that and you blend them into the team, right? If I think about some of the customers where we've helped and said to them, I think you want staff augmentation, that's great, we can do it. You're trying to build a product, and yes, you're using staff augmentation, but at the end of the day, you are trying to build working software and to get a business outcome from that. And rather than assemble a team of individuals, if you assemble that staff augmentation group from a service provider who's got a bit of oversight and can make sure their staff are actually contributing, adding value every day, that always seems to have better outcomes.
Sure.
And I mean, we do a lot of staff org as a company, for many reasons, I see that working a lot better than an under-resourced company where they think that just hiring people, putting them into a project, giving them a basic induction, but not really treating them like employees, but kind of quasi-employees, doesn't seem to yield the same outcome.
What you're saying is kind of that staff augmentation has a lot of benefits, but with it, obviously, like anything, there comes a certain amount of risk, and you want to make sure that you can increase the probability of getting as many of the benefits as you envision, and mitigating as many of the risks by doing it, poorly, or going cheap, or using
Mm.
something where you don't have verification, you don't have oversight, and things
Yep.
like that, right?
Yep. So so let's think about how you get you deal with some of those risks. So the first one is know who you're hiring,
Hmm.
right? Know what they're capable of. Really drill into that. So the question is, can you actually do that effectively,
Hmm.
right? There are plenty of people who run an interview and for some reason they'll hire people because they sound credible in the interview and then they discover that they're not fit for the purpose of their project. Okay, sure they may have developed websites. Sure they may have been a splendid back end engineer, but in terms of what you're needing done with your product, there are problems. So you've got to very thoroughly vet your hires, and if you can't do that, um, don't hope that it's going to work out. Because many times, and you think of it, if you've got half the people on your team not quite perfect fits, um, you're not going to get a perfect product.
Hmm.
And you're paying good money either way. I mean, staff org doesn't seem to cost much less than, or if it's sometimes it's virtually the same price as hiring from a firm. So that's the first thing. The second thing you got to do is you've got to make sure that these people, even if they're with you briefly, really understand what you're doing, what the whole purpose and the vision behind the software aims and what their role is contributing to that. So you've got to train them in your
Hmm.
product and what you're trying to do. And if they don't have the same understanding as everyone else on your team, I don't think you're going to get the same outcomes that you want. So why would you put yourself in a position where you would hope that they just do what they were told every day and you get great outcomes? So you've got to invest some time in training them.
Huh.
That then comes down to, I hope that you've got some very clear process documentation and documentation around what you're building. All right. Now, ironically, sometimes people will use Staff Org because you can bring in experts who, as part of working with the team, can actually bring that kind of know-how and discipline to a team, and basically raise the capability. So we've seen that work perfectly well with a specialist Staff Org person, doing a role. Um, the next sort of risk I would say is that you want to think about, well, you're managing a program of work. You've got a roadmap. You've got a backlog that you've groomed. You've put it into sprints. These people are probably working in sprints, of course, as part of teams. They need to be managed like everybody else, and you've got to make sure that you've got the oversight of that in place. If you have 20 individuals from a staffing company like a Robert Half, and I keep going back to that because it seems to be everyone knows who they are, maybe, you've still got to manage them individually. They've all come from
Hmm.
somewhere with 20 different sets of baggage, 20 different sets of worldviews. Now they're going to do what they can, the best to their ability. They will fill out your timesheets. They will write documentation. You hope they will commit code, right? But this whole I can guarantee you, there's no common understanding of how they operate. If you go to a firm that has employees that they put through a staff augmentation model for customers, I can guarantee you that they're going to come at least with a pretty uniform way of working. Now, the question is that right
That
for
is,
you?
yeah.
Right? So there's a difference of where you get these people from.
So let's go back a couple of minutes and take out a bit that you were talking about, but like separate that and talk about it individually. And that is, I think most CTOs will look at staff augmentation, and they think that their job is to hire, obviously, roles and skill sets that they need augmented.
Mm,
Um, but they want to make sure that they're hiring people that fit into their culture, their system, and their processes,
mm,
can integrate themselves well into their team. But what is the accountability? What is the responsibility? And what are some of the things that the CTO needs to do in order to facilitate this integration, this cultural alignment? What sort of environment, and even with their own full-time staff, how do they need
mm,
to create this environment where people are not only potentially good fits but become good fits, even though they are contractors by definition.
Yeah.
But like, how do you maximize
Mhm.
their integration?
Well, now when you think about it, this sometimes comes to the transactionality of all of this. Usually, people are working on a staff augmentation model to supplement their full-time team. Okay, so these people are really on a finite term contract, 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever, maybe gets renewed. But, they're usually on a fixed term. They're there for a hump of work that needs to be got through. And so the question really is okay, if they're going to be around for 3 months, do you really have to invest in assimilating them into your culture, or at least even assessing they're a good fit,
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've all seen a combination of companies that, yep, if it takes a week to induct you, we're still going to do it. And others that have said short term, get them working, shadowed with someone, they get the bare minimum. And again, it just depends what level of oversight and support.
Let's assume it's not just time boxed, and going into it that it's a 3 month or a 6 months, because development is always going on. There's enhancements, there's maintenance, there's new products and features and roadmaps, and so I mean you are investing in someone who is learning your company. They're learning your application, your tech stack. They are engaging with your culture, and we were on a customer call yesterday where they had resources there. It might have started with a vision of 6 months, but it's been 5 or 6 or 7 years that they've been working together, right?
Yep, that's right. Yep, and lots of the original people still there. Well, I think as a CTO bringing on whatever strategy you're using, you're always hoping that there will be a symbiotic, harmonious cultural effect and impact from whatever party you're bringing in, right? So now, if we think of bringing staff org in a distributed model, and we're sitting on the west coast of the US and we're dealing with India, it's a bit of a stretch in the day there, isn't there? Right? Versus dealing with a team in Chile. Okay, so there are imposts that you bring on the team, on your team, as well as your team on the provider. That's just an issue about how your operating model and how you've structured it. The heart of the cultural thing is do you treat these people decently? Do they actually feel like they're part of what you're doing and they understand what they're doing? I often think the culture thing can be a bit of an excuse. If people have a clear understanding, they're all good actors, they're wanting to do good work, I think people get along all over the world. And there's some pretty fundamental principles about being decent with people. Don't have to give them everything. They don't have to have stock options. In fact, we'll talk about that in a minute, because that's an interesting one that's come up a couple of times. But you need to make sure, by and large, that the people are going to fit in as opposed to not fit in. So how do you do that? Well, we've got a model that says, let's see if there's any evidence of this happening before. Right. So let's deal with people that have contracted for offshore companies before, and then get their references. Especially if you're dealing with individuals, you have to reference check every one of them. All right. If you're dealing with a services company, I think it's a slightly different matter, because the services company's on the hook for, even in a staff org model, making sure that their people meet all of your standards for work. All right, that goes a long way to contributing to culture. I mean, if the person's not doing what they're meant to be doing, they're not filling in their timesheet, or they're not documenting things to a level of detail, that creates a lot of issues on with a client, right? It's a cultural issue, right? They're just not doing what we need. So that's what I'd be concerned about. Focus on the things that are, mandatory to get working, and most of it should take care of itself.
Rich, we've been, talking about some things that are pitfalls, maybe even a little bit of a horror story when it comes to staff augmentation. But can you give us a clearer picture of where it's worked really well and the company succeeded, whether it's because of cultural fit, or maybe they actually brought the people to their offices, or they visited their offices and kind of worked it out where, let's sit down, let's have dinner, let's talk and get to know one another before they come in. So it's not like a cold box situation where they're just in their offices. The company that brought them on are in their offices and they've never met and they don't understand the other people. They're just trying to get them to do work.
Oh yeah, and I think that goes to the heart of it. It's actually how you're treating those people. Are you grateful and respecting their contribution as a professional? A lot of these people in staff augmentation, they're very good people,
Hmm.
right? I often wonder why they're not working in a larger company. That could go to the issue about actually how they work. Are they kind of lone wolves sort of thing, or they're just sick of corporateness, right? It's a bit of both sometimes. And I'm fine with people who say, look, I don't like working in a corporate environment, but I like working for a corporation. I don't want all the whistles with it. But I think Jarret, it works really, really well when people have got a clear understanding of what they've got to do. They are treated as equals in terms of the work that they're doing with the full-time staff. And I've seen a lot of clients where the staff are very grateful that they're getting help that they need, and they know that it's only for a 12-month contract or whatever to finish a project or a new set of features or those sorts of things. So clarity of understanding is critical. We see customers will send over things like swag offshore to their contractors and things like that. I mean, it's those little things sometimes go a long way to creating a bit of a bond here. I'm not hired help in a distant country where you take my work and use it. I actually, my opinions are valued, my thoughts are valued, and you treat me well at work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wanted to get into that sort of extrinsically motivated, intrinsically motivated. These are humans, right? And they do have
Yep.
freedom to move on. And if anyone will pay them to get an activity done or to do X, Y,
Yeah.
or Z, but if they feel like they're empowered or they're treated fairly or equally with everyone else, those are things that create value because you're creating a stickiness, you're leveraging knowledge transfer, right, with the
Yep.
individuals that you have. You're not losing them, and there's a lot of value lost when you're having to offboard and onboard a new person and bring them up to speed, right?
And yeah, absolutely. And given what we've seen in the world, it's never been easier for anyone, anywhere, to change jobs to work anywhere, if
Hmm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, the options are much more plentiful than they were pre-pandemic. I mean, that
For
whole
sure.
that whole distributed work has just exploded, and the digital nomad thing on top of it. I can work from anywhere for anyone, just as long as I do the work. Um, One thing I wanted to touch on that I've seen a couple of times in the last few years is where um, a customer will come along and say, we even want to give these people stock options.
Hmm.
And that sounds awesome until we get to the fine print of a couple of issues that will come up. Um, and a lot of partner firms that we deal with um, really don't want that happening for a couple of reasons. Their staff offered stock options. It's not that they become wealthier than their staff. It just creates a bit of a disincentive amongst their other team members. They all want to be on the team that's getting the options, right? Now, having said this, I've actually never seen it executed. I've seen the idea floated many times and it never works out. That's one of the reasons. So it may well be if that's what you want to do, you better find individuals who'll take your options and that'll be fine. But I've never
Hmm.
seen it come off in a services firm where they've said, they're our employees, we pay them. Please don't be providing them those kinds of incentives. Uh, Gift cards never seem to work, but money does. The practicality, I mean, an Amazon gift card in the US does not work in Chile, okay? Unless you've got a
Hmm.
US Amazon account. Never going to happen. Apple gift cards are the same. Send cash. Get the company to show you that they've actually bought them for the staff or whatever. Um, we have clients who will pay for events on a very regular basis. Dinners and half day offsites or offsites. We have one staff augmentation company that we work with in the Philippines. that is actually a really good model. I mean, we don't work with a lot of pure staff org firms, but this is a great one because of the pastoral care that they provide. And they will assemble that whole crew of about 1,000 people that work with them every year and take them away for 3 days. And that kind of creates a camaraderie between, a bunch of individuals who are working for different companies all over the world, to actually say that there's something more that they belong to. So it's more of an identification thing, but that's more than just a lot of other staff or companies will do. All they want you to do is fill the timesheet in so they can bill.
So, do you feel, Rich, that it is more leaning towards the company that holds the people or the company that is going to staff augment with those people to make them feel comfortable and to make them feel part of the crowd?
Well, the staff org companies hardly ever can have that power over them. All right, they're just payment agents. All right. Honestly, it's the end clients that have that power to create that bond and that stickiness with people that they're hiring under that model. And sometimes we see customers, they'll have people work with them for a few years, and the contractor will say, well, actually, you know what, I just want to flip over as a full-time employee for this company. Right? And it's kind of a natural thing. I mean, sometimes they become more of a company person than a contract house person, if you get what I mean. They really do begin to be a very valuable member of staff, maybe a process owner, maybe a process expert within the company, or someone who has helped transform a process, and they're super vital to that company going forward. They don't want to lose them. And one of the risks you run with staff org is that, the resources that you control, if you like, some of them want to do that. They want to go and work for the client. And it's not a bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
Rich, if I can ask a question that I have to believe is on the mind of every listener, and that is, am I doing it right? And am I doing it to a degree that is right compared to what? Compared to someone else. And so, for example, the other day, we were talking with a client, and he was mentioning that they had successfully scaled up a flexible contracting model to where 25% of their engineering staff was outsourced contractors, staff augmentation contractors. And he said that his board of directors said, well, if you're telling us about all these benefits and it's working so swimmingly, then I want 50%. Why not 50%? Can you do 50%? He's like, I don't know. Is that good or bad, or can you give me some direction on how far we should take it? Some CTOs are like 90%, contractors, and other CTOs are 90% full time, and they will fight to the tooth as to why one is better than the other. So, can you help our audience sort of rationalize or consider? Every situation is different, but what do you say to that?
All right. So, that comes down to, let's think about why we're doing this, right? We're trying to build working software in a certain period of time to a certain budget. And that often will drive the decisions about resourcing and geopolitical risk aside and those sorts of things. But new product build may require more people for a defined period of time. So you might be able to have 50% of the teams working on your projects either from a software company or from a staffing company, and it will depend on how well resourced you are to run that, right? And again, you've just got to, you can get working, but if you sit back and think about, right, what's the scope of the work I have to do? How are we going to do that? Are we equipped as a company to take on a lot of full-time employees? There is a reason why a lot of companies will outsource large projects and basically only have the business people working on the project. It's because they're not well resourced enough internally to run and manage a project with the engineers.
Sure.
All right. And it's and the reason is they want the stuff done as soon as it can be, not whenever it can be. So when you're on a you've got a product, you've got customers, you want to be in market. You don't want to be in development for the rest of your lives. That will often drive a decision about how many people do I need and when, and then how am I going to get them.
What is the critical path or the fastest path to the most quality, hyper specialized talent at decent prices, and not making a major mistake or missing something? Is there a faster path to contracting with assurance?
Well, let's think about what happens if I go to a staffing company and I say I need 20 people. I want to stand up 2 teams, a couple of people across the teams, like a scrum master, maybe a project manager running across them, but 7 to 8 engineers and quality engineers inside a team with a business analyst maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to choose the 20 myself one by one, or I'm able to go to a firm and say, have you got 20 people that you can block together as a team, that have worked together before as a team?
Okay.
You got your 2 options. Now, it's still staff augmentation. You haven't said, I have a project requirement and I'm going to give it to you, and I'll see you in 3 months when you've, built out that module. It's not a fixed price contract necessarily, or anything like that. So that velocity, just even to get started, can be gained by, finding someone who's working with a team of people.
Sure,
and
for sure.
That works out really, really well. And then you're hoping that as part of that, they're coming to you with a pretty common set of standards. There's only sort of one thing to adjust if it's not to your liking. It's not like you got 20 people to make sure they're all doing it your way, which is why I said before, if you go down that path, that's why you've got to do the training. You got to run them through and say, look, this is our development methodology. And as you're going through it, picking up what they don't see as how they do it, or not the ways that they've used to been doing things, and there are subtleties about those things. You can at least address it, rather than discover during the process that it's that's not how they roll. Okay, fine, it's change.
So like Augmentation Factory that has already solved for quality control and consistency and okay.
Well, you think of quality as being just something that's repeatable. It's like 20 people who run from the same playbook.
Yeah.
Now, if it's the wrong playbook for you, that's fine. Get another partner. But if it's the right playbook, you're just off to a greater start. And that's why even whatever you do here, you've got to make some really diligent investigation as to whether or not who you're working with is the right group to be working with.
Sure.
Do I have to do it 20 individuals, or do I have to do it with a company with key people who are going to give me the 20 people? You've still got to do it with either one.
Sure.
One comes with a little bit more of a remedy, perhaps, than I've hired 20 people. 6 of them are superstars. 6 of them are pretty good. 3 of them I'm not sure about, and 3 of them are problems, and I do need to move them off the project this week and replace them as well, by the way. So there's a bit more going on here. So that can be the dynamic that you get when you do the individuals. And I had an experience last year where working with a certain agency, which I may have named, there comes a point in time when even they get sick of having to give you new resumes because they think they've given you enough. Right?
So Rich, you talk about 20. With staff augmentation, is there a minimum? Is one person going to be enough to augment your staff, or is there like even a maximum where this is just too many people to bring on from outside of my company, where that's where the camel, the back breaks, where there's just too many people that aren't coming, they're coming from the outside. You have to get something done. You can't hire enough to make the project happen on your own, and you want to augment, but is there a breaking point where it's just too many?
Well, we'll deal with the small first, and then we'll go to the large. You can staff augment one. You have, and staff augmentation in a circumstance where you've got a team working, but you're missing key knowledge or expertise, is not a good place to be in, because let's say it's a team of 6 or 7 working, and they're missing an architect with specific knowledge of a combination of tools that they're using. And someone's going to make poorer decisions than they would if they had a decent architect working with them from a solution point of view or a hardware point of view, right? So from that perspective, it's critical that you go and find the right person immediately and plug that gap. Works perfectly well then, all right? Just as you go and scale up, the complexity gets more. So if you're using it as a one-off specialist type plugging, it's fine. If you're hiring whole teams that way, it just becomes a lot more complex. Every individual needs to be dealt with individually, right? You know, someone's got to interview them. Someone's got to approve them. It might be running through a series of interviews, okay? When you're doing that, because they've got no history, no track record, the only remedy is that you take them off the team and stop paying for them. You know, you're going to do a code test with every one of them to make sure that they are what they say they are. I know. I mean, some companies do that. And what I do know is if you go to a software firm and say, hey, I need to augment my staff and I need, a couple of seniors and I need 4 intermediate engineers and I'd like each intermediate engineer to have a junior alongside with them, there is no way that they're going to subject their staff that they know who are credible to a code test, right? But they'll guarantee that they are what they are and they'll work to get the right team assembled. There's a synergy that can happen there that's good. Now, when you go to large teams on scale, and I'm talking, let's just talk 20 teams. 20 teams of 7 people, that's 140 people, right? You've probably got another 5 or 6 people as a minimum working in a program management office. And you'll have different teams around infrastructure and operations as well as the software engineering and product teams. I wouldn't want to do augmentation. I'd want a couple of decent partners who not only could bring the right people, but with all of that, a body of knowledge and experience in the business processes and the types of products you're doing and something new, right? And AI is an area where I'd want to deal with companies that have an AI factory as opposed to a bunch of people who have, worked on a couple of AI videos at the weekend and come to you and said that they know about this stuff.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
So I'm seeing a bit of that really, companies that can bring you enhancements in not what you're doing also, but how you are working. Right? Can I make your engineering more efficient? We can stand up teams if we're using certain approaches to engineering that will help us speed up the engineering and increase the quality of it. Are you open to that? Let's try it. That's a much better outcome on a large scale. So I wouldn't do staff org at scale.
So looking ahead, do you see staff augmentation being more of a trend or having a bigger role in the software development industry going forward? Or where is the world evolving?
Well, it's never going away, and it shouldn't go away either because it serves a purpose. Mm-hmm. And, I think things sometimes go in waves. And, that was always my challenge at CSC when the client would say, I just want bodies. And you say, got it. This is the group that deals with that. And, my consulting teams would be saying, hey, hang on, why aren't we selling our guys in there? And it's like, well, because the client's pretty clear that they don't need that and this is what they want, right? So that model's never going to go away. And it comes down to, client preferences and whether or not they think they've got things in place. I think what we saw was an explosion of people saying, hire me individually, which kind of pushed more staff org. And we haven't really spoken about that, but I think a lot of companies are waking up to the fact that while it sounded cheap, there are a lot of complexities to it and a lot of expense to it. And there's not a lot of great bang for your buck out of those extra expenses. So I'll give you an we had a company come to us a few years ago with a major problem identified during a due diligence that they were paying contractors in Latin America directly. And there were 10 of them. And and we worked with that customer to sort of come up with a strategy that was legally compliant with the rules of the 6 countries that they were operating in, which is basically you need to either register an entity in those countries and be paying the taxes for those effectively deemed employees, or you can't be working with them. So, we funneled them into a payroll company. But, that came at great expense. And the problem was that most of those employees weren't paying their taxes.
Wow.
And I'll never forget saying to that CEO of the company who's selling it, what you may have to do here is realize that your gross pay now becomes the employee's new net pay. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're paying them $100. They're not paying any taxes. They want $100 now that they're paying tax. So You've got to gross that up. Plus, you've got to pay the PEO company, which is anywhere. I've heard of some of them on volume doing it at 8%, but you're paying 15% plus all the other on costs, insurances, and what have you. So all of a sudden, I'm telling you, the price of these people are doubling. All right, wow. But it was pragmatic because a transaction went through, and dare I say it, that's a good corporate citizen pays its way, and we want companies paying taxes as they should, and not avoiding them. So I think a lot of companies who have jumped into this have realized that it is an expensive proposition, and they can't see the value, or they're not seeing the value in doing it. Mm-hmm. So they'll swing back around to dealing with services companies that can basically say, yeah, we payroll the people, don't worry about it. Here's the all-in cost. It's that's it. You don't have to manage that complexity yourself, and that's a problem all over the world. Right, so permanent establishment kicks in usually after 6 months. So companies need to be addressing that. Now, it's never going to go away as a strategy that's effective when it's exercised well. So I'm a great proponent of it. I just am a proponent of doing it well and de-risking it and making sure that it's going to deliver value to you as opposed to deliver bodies to you that you pay for every week.
That was some great insight on staff augmentation. Rich, on behalf of myself and Andy, we want to thank you for being on Software Without Borders. Hopefully we can get you back for another edition soon.
Oh, come back anytime you need me, Jarret. Be very happy to.
Thanks. And we appreciate all the listeners tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Software Without Borders.